Hi everyone. I hope you're all doing well. Today I'm going to present one of my research projects that I've done and I'm proud of, and I'm still trying to work on it more because I want to get it implemented in the school system in the BC curriculum. But I would present this how I would at a conference style, like about 20-25 minute presentation is basically what I would do. So my project is called The Regional Geography of South Sudan, and it was done in 2024 during my undergraduate degree with under the supervision of Dr. Tom Wadachak, who is a geography professor at TRU. I came in contact with Professor Tom Wadachak when I did a geography field course in Japan, and he was the main principal, the main professor. And I learned so much about the geography of Japan, and I wanted to take more geography courses. And I had room to do some more electives, and I wanted to do research. And I knew that Dr. Tom Walichak would be a perfect match. So I got in contact with him and he agreed, and we ended up doing this project together. So, also being a student at TRU, I'm also a student at WMAC, which is a grassroots organization teaching people Shekwet Mixin. And I've been learning Shekwet Mixin Eastern. So, in most of my presentations, or all of them, I will start with the land acknowledgement and prayer. Tekel Cookby, Cooksteku, Esteku, Temusku. Yakaminta Hakwa Estem na Alia na Temuth. Yakaminta Wakamuf, Remiskriskram, Resprispabu Ya Resal Kwa El Kakwai Reshitlin. Kunukwateku, Es Yoyots, Cooksteku, Tekel Cookby, Esteku, Hakwa Estem. So this prayer is talking about giving us strength, taking care of the water, taking care of the animals, the four-legged, the birds, the being grateful that we are strong and all together. So it's a really beautiful prayer. And for my land acknowledgement, why Kawat Madelene Kajusa request were Kasaltan Madi de South Sudan, wa Akanak na TRU na Masters of Education, Cooksjam Takal Cookby South Kwa Sadak Kwa Skoskom El Reshakwatmek, La Rapusma as El Kwaltan Alia. Cookswell Rakamui na Canada S Latmetara Kamuf El Taka Pel Tmuf. For African ancestor and land acknowledgement, I would like to thank my ancestors who came from East Africa, from the Mahdi people in South Sudan by the Ugandan border. I acknowledge the colonization of this continent and its regions, the slavery, civil wars, displacement, migration, and tribalism. The people of South Sudan and Sudan are still facing wars and conflicts to this day. I give thanks to my parents for having the strength and resilience, for bringing me and my older brother here, and my younger brother was born in Canada, and for being help for bringing us here for a better life. And then my mother tongue, Ingoni, Ingoniko, Yutri, Manjara, Masa Manjara. So I'm basically saying, hi, I'm fine. I'm fine. How are you? And and saying thank you. It's like a hi and a goodbye, basically. So, about me, I am a Sudan born South Sudanese Canadian with roots from the Mahdi people of South Sudan. I completed my bachelor's degree in 2025 at TRU, and now I'm doing my master's of education at TRU. I became interested in education and curriculum development during my undergraduate studies when I started taking geography elective courses. Some of my interests are indigenous knowledge, South Sudanese knowledge, South Sudanese people in the diaspora, geography studies, first generation studies, geography, sociology, intergenerational trauma, decolonization, art based learning. So let's get into the regional geography of South Sudan. So, what is it? So, I'll get a little bit more background because it was a directed studies. So directed studies at TRU allow students to undertake a topic with a supervisor, and my supervisor was Tom Wadachak. And this was part of my undergraduate degree, but now as in my master's, it's something I like to expand and like to implement. So so I made a course, a grade 5 and a grade 12 course. So this is basically what it is. Um, these courses explore the emergence of South Sudan as a distant space through the organizing concepts of regional geography, human geography, cultural geography, feminist geography, the sociological perspective, and cross cultural interactions. Also, looking at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, goals 1, 4, 5, 6, 13, 15, 17, which help aid and foster evidence based solutions for global challenges. So a little history about Sudan, because most people don't know about Sudan or South Sudan. So really brief history, because I there's more to it, but I just get into really brief. So before 2011, Sudan was one country. It was colonized by the Egyptians and the British. And in 1956, Sudan got its independence. There was a first civil war in 1955 to 1972. The second civil war, 1983 to 2005. 2005, there was a peace agreement, and then 2011, South Sudan became the youngest country in the world at just 14 years old. But then there was the South Sudanese War in 2013 to 2020, and now there's the current war in Sudan, and that started in 2023, and that war is seeping into South Sudan, and it's affecting its people there as well. We might see South Sudan go into a war, another war, and it's unfortunate to see these areas, these regions, continue having wars for a very long time. It's very unfortunate, and some of the reasons for wars in the region of Sudan and South Sudan are tribalism, religion, identity, economic inequality, power, so many things. So, what is happening in South Sudan today? It The war in Sudan is impacting South Sudan. It has created the largest humanitarian crisis in record history, pushing 15.8 million people into humanitarian need as civilians bear the brunt of violence. More than 1 million refugees and returnees have crossed from Sudan to South Sudan, often with little money than they can carry. The news arrives urgently need food, shelter, healthcare, and protection. At the same time, the communities hosting them, many already struggling to feed their own families, are under immense strain. Flooding has also fueled a growing public health emergency. Contaminated water sources and overcrowded displacement sites have contributed to South Sudan's longest running cholera outbreak, over 100,000 cases. And, when there's flooding, it could cause climate change refugees. There's already refugees, but there's also refugees who have to flee their homes because of natural disaster. So, what is your research question? So, my research question at the time, and is still current to this day, is how can the Canadian school system incorporate South Sudanese studies to show that we are more globally connected and break down stereotypes of what we have of Africa or South Sudan? What research methods did I apply? Non traditional pedagogical ways of learning, such as artwork, journal notes, and making a course for grade 5 and grade 12 students. At the time I was doing this, South Sudan went to the Olympics to play basketball, and they played an exhibition basketball game against the United States, and the score was, I think it was 100 to 101, something like that, and it was a very close game, and nobody thought South Sudan would do good and to be that close to beating the United States. And there's a lot of racism towards the South Sudanese players, and not a lot of knowledge about the South Sudanese players. A lot of them grew up in Australia or Canada or the US, or part of the diaspora, part of that first generation experience, but still the racism that the South Sudanese players received was really bad. And doing this work was really hard and heavy, but having these journal notes was good because I was able to reflect. And at that time, when they almost won, it was a really big, important moment for our people and for the world. So I was so happy I decided to do my research at that time, such a critical point, and that the war in Sudan was going on. So it was just all of these things about learning more about my identity, more learning about South Sudan. It was really good because all of it kind of just folded and came together. Um, I did a lot of artwork as well to express what I'm going through. I feel like a lot of people who went through a lot of trauma, intergenerational trauma, you come from a background of refugees um, or civil war. Having that outlet is important because I believe in that field of study of intergenerational trauma, like especially the historical trauma or any other kinds of trauma, let's say like residential school survivors and how the treatment that they experienced at residential school, they didn't have the skills to be good parents because of how badly they were treated at the residential school. They're away from their family. They couldn't speak their languages. They couldn't, wear their traditional clothing. They had to change their name. They were trying, residential schools were there to try to take the Indian away from the child. And so when the children left the residential school, it was like, their identity was stripped from them. They were abused. A lot of bad things happen at the residential schools. And it would be hard for anybody to try to go back to their community and try to be parents one day. And that trauma is it's in our blood. There's a Cree saying that says, blood remembers. So for indigenous people today, it's in their DNA for what their ancestors went through. Even for me, it's in my DNA. What my parents went through, what I went through, what my ancestors went through. It's in our DNA, it's in our blood. I believe in that. And so having an outlet is really important when you do work, when you're reflecting about yourself and your community. And making the grade 12 and grade 5 courses was not something I particularly was interested in doing at first, to be honest with you. But my professor is really into education. Well, he's a professor, and he thought that it would be good if there were other, if I could do more. And when I made my own course, maybe really fell in love with curriculum development because I could make a course that has never been done before, and I could teach it or show it, and show a perspective that we don't usually see in Canadian textbooks. So it really sparked my creativity, and that's kind of how I got into education. I don't think if I did this direct to studies 2 years ago, that I would have chose a master's of education. Maybe I would have chose something else, but I'm really happy that I connected with him. So what results were obtained? Well, we are more globally connected than we think we are. This type of research aids in decolonizing Western school systems by bringing awareness to South Sudan with different areas of geography, such as regional, cultural, feminist. What is the significance of my findings? Well, the significance is we need to bring more awareness to South Sudan and develop a South Sudanese lens in the West in Western education. Growing up in Calgary, I don't think any textbook ever talked about Sudan or South Sudan. Um, so there was like that disconnect when you're living in a multicultural society, learning about different parts of the world, and you don't see yourself reflected. And to be honest, in the Canadian school system and social studies at that time, we I think we mostly just focused on Canadian studies. I mean, a little bit of the U.S. and a little bit, I'll say a little bit of Indigenous studies. I think I learned more about Indigenous people when I was in university, still am in university, than I ever did from K to 12. And I think that says a lot. And maybe that's the difference between the Alberta curriculum and the British Columbia BC curriculum. So um, that could be a reason too. But yeah, like when I connect with more Indigenous scholars and creating curriculum, it's really important to put yourself in it and your culture in it. And if there's nothing about your people, then make a Madi class, make a South Sudan class, make a South Sudan regional geography of South Sudan class or course and teach it. And I think by doing this Masters of Education, I'm building those skills to be able to teach something that I'm passionate about and create a create curriculum. And this regional geography of South Sudan, I really would love to get implemented. Just trying to connect with the right people that can help me do that. Like I might have to email the Ministry of Education in BC and like pitch this to them, because I think this would be really helpful as South Sudanese people become more of a demographic here in Canada, to know more about our history, our story, our cultures. You know, it's just so many different cultures. It's important to learn about, and South Sudanese people are becoming a really big demographic, not in Kamloops per se, but in Calgary and Toronto, Vancouver, Regina, Red Deer, these really big cities. And I think it'll be really good because, you know, basically Canada's a multicultural society, but I think if things were to go in a good way, you could move into an intercultural society where it's not just about living with different cultures. That's kind of like multicultural. Okay, we can all coexist and live with different cultures, but an intercultural society would be like when when you're willing to take that step to learn more about the culture. For example, me learning Machine, that's intercultural work. You're learning the language. You're learning how to say wike and we wike dap um cooksham. You know, that's intercultural work. You know, learning how to, you know, make bannock or oven bannock, or going to a sweat lodge or going to the power. That's intercultural work. That's a society that of course we would love to live in, but we can only pray that that's how it will go. Um, this work suggests that we are more globally connected than we think we are. There needs to be more South Sudanese history being taught in the Canadian school system, and bring awareness to South Sudan, and yeah, and to bring awareness to South Sudan, because there's a huge population of first generation, second generation South Sudanese people here now in Canada. And there is something about when you're represented in a textbook, represented in the school system, that you do better. When the teachers look like you, when the curriculum reflect you, students do a lot better. I've seen that at TRU with Indigenous students, that when you have that space, when you have your voice heard, you do well. There's more opportunities. School doesn't feel so like scary anymore. You feel like you can do it. And we can now see marginalized people, such as queer people, um, people of color, women, you know, in spaces like in engineering, in education, in the medical field. You know, that's what we want. We want to see marginalized people, racialized people, people, you know, who are systemically have, you know, been underrepresented in these spaces. That's what we would love to see. Um, yeah, that's kind of like, that would be really, really amazing, and to give that space. And I think if we want to do things in a more inclusive and a more diverse and equitable um, kind of way, it would be great to incorporate South Sudanese knowledge in our school systems, and not just South Sudanese. It could be for so many different countries that students should be learning. Young people should be learning, you know, in grade 5, grade 12. Learn about the world around us. Not just focus just on Canada. Just it's good to learn about, you know, the world around us. And if we do study about Canada or the US, learn about the deep history, learn about the indigenous people, learn about slavery, learn about all these things, because a lot of the time we're not taught these things and we're going through the world blindly. So the school system needs to be changed and implement really good information that students would need. Instead of trying to erase history, let's talk about, let's hear what really happened. So I can get into a little bit about what the courses have. So for the grade 12 course, it aligns with the grade 12 human geography elective course, human geography 12. So what I would like students to do in this course or module is okay, the basic is to learn where is South Sudan on a map. And I also want students to try to understand how do cultural biases affect how people perceive the world around them. This course is to break down stereotypes in South Sudan and highlight the hidden gems and show that we are more globally connected than we think we are. For example, South Sudan is home to the Al Sadd, which is one of Africa's largest wetlands. If I have a picture, I'll put it right here. But it's beautiful, and a lot of beautiful wildlife and plants and a lot of lush greens. So there's a lot of beauty to South Sudan. When you think about it that way, it kind of changes your perspective and how you view South Sudan. Um, I want students to learn oops, the process of cultural and reconnect with one roots. For example, develop versus developing countries. Are these words harmful? Should we continue to use these words? Inequalities for women in South Sudan. There are some tribes in South Sudan that still believe in child marriage or still believe in not sending the girls to school, but there's some tribes that do. So looking at the inequalities within tribes and tribalism and looking at first generation experiences. You know, when I say we're more globally connected than we think we are, it's like there is some reserves in Canada and for indigenous people that don't have access to clean drinking water and it's 2026. In South Sudan, in lots of the rural parts, they don't have clean drinking water. Um, the water is not very clean. I remember I read an article about the United Nations peacekeepers went to South Sudan to help with the water and help to purify it. And one of the findings from the peace officers was that it's hard to have clean drinking water in a conflicted area and zone because South Sudan is kind of like one of those places that you don't really know what's going to happen. It's very unstable. And if they're trying to do all these things and, you know, purify the water, have like chlorine tablets to kind of clean the water, but then there's a war breaks out, they have to come back to Canada or to the US or wherever, you know, it is hard to do that. So I think that that made a lot of sense. 'Cause I think there's people who do want to help, but like there is that safety part as well. But yeah, there's a lot of organizations that are trying to help create clean drinking water for people in South Sudan, and a lot of people would walk really far to get water, and that takes up most of your day, and it's not clean water. You have a really high chance of getting sick. And my mom saying that when she was growing up, that if you didn't get diarrhea this week, you would get it next week because the water was just so not clean. But they had no other choice, so they would cook with that water, bathe with that water, drink that water. So that's all they had. And sometimes when that's all you have, that's all you have. So I think it's something like you know for the grade 12 students, I think to be thinking this way would be really good because once you get out of grade 12 to kind of have that cultural competency, to have that sociological perspective, to have empathy for others is really, really good. And if you were to introduce it for really younger kids, like kind of just like how we are connected, like from the global north to the global south, that just, yeah, we live in Canada, but we have similarities. Like we see homeless people here in Canada, right? It's people who are struggling here as well. You know, look at there's some communities that don't have access to clean drinking water, and this is in Canada. And just trying to be like try to show them that because some people think of Africa, you're like, oh my god, this thing of poverty, this thing the worst, the worst, the worst. And when you think of Canada, they think the best of the best, the best. So it's kind of just like changing people's perspective, saying, okay, there's good in both, there's bad in both. That's kind of what I'm trying to get. And I want students to build that empathy. And, like a lot of indigenous people say, there's no, we're one, there's only one race, the human race. And I think that's kind of the message from it's going to come from these courses, from these modules. And for the grade 5 students, it's kind of the same, but to the grade 5 level, such as where is South Sudan on a map? Um, the importance of watersheds, water life, climate change, the Madi language, maybe just some words in there. Just trying to get young people to have that empathy is really the main thing about the course. And if any time they're out and about and somebody talks about Africa, and like, oh, does anyone know any African countries? You could be like, yes, I know about South Sudan, and then this, that. It's the youngest country in the world. So it's about building their knowledge and excitement about Africa and about South Sudan. So that's kind of where this is going. And there's a lot of role models in the South Sudanese diaspora who we could look up to, such as Adu Akach, who's a South Sudanese Australian model who is gorgeous. Yes, she's an amazing model, and that's somebody we could look up to. Lual Deng, Sudanese born and British former NBA basketball player. He played with many teams such as the Chicago Bulls and Miami Heat. And Ruben Grang is a Canadian citizen and South Sudanese researcher looking at education and youth. These are many people we could look up to and can be good role models because unfortunately in our South Sudanese community, especially in Calgary, unfortunately, there's a lot of homelessness and a lot of young people who are passing away. And unfortunately, their voices are not heard, especially the ones who have passed. But by having this research, I feel like I could put their voices there. And homelessness is it's a really complex issue. And no, I don't feel like we shouldn't live in a world where people are homeless. We should not live in that kind of world. But I talked to one of the community members and said there's about 800 or over 800 South Sudanese people in Calgary right now who are homeless. You go to downtown Calgary, you'll see a huge population of South Sudanese people who are homeless, mostly by that central library in downtown. But it's really, really, really sad what's going on in our community. And I think that's the intergenerational, that affects generations. There's been studies that say Holocaust survivors and their children or their grandchildren have the same kind of have the same kind of reaction as their grandparents. And these kids have never even been, they were never even in the Holocaust, but they, because blood remembers, that type of trauma is passed down. It's in your DNA. You can't just experience the Holocaust or experience civil war or experience residential school and be like, okay, back to normal. Like, no, that stuff is like really deep in your body, and you can't just, like, that stuff does not go away. So it makes sense how this generations will have it. And some indigenous scholars believe it takes 7 generations to heal. And I think right now that we might be just at our first generation. We could be for some people, right? So it's gonna take a while for a lot of healing. And so healing's also really huge for this kind of work that I'm doing. For example, I would love to connect with the South Sudanese youth of Canada, which is contributing to the welfare of South Sudanese youth across the country. To achieve this, South Sudanese Youth of Canada aims to establish a diverse and strong base of youth leaders to support and contribute not only to South Sudanese community, but Canadian society at large. So they're doing so much good work, really trying to represent South Sudanese people in a good way, get them the support that they need, because it's a really, there's so much support for our people. And as an artist, I also believe in art based learning, which is an instrument used for artistic skills, process, and experience as educational tool to foster learning and in a non-artistic discipline and domains. I love painting and I love art. Like, maybe I'll put some of the artwork that I've done right here, but I love it. And I can express so much with it. And this work is available on OER Commons. If anyone wants to connect with me, any researchers, professors who would like to connect with me, and also send this video out to different professors in the geography department at different universities who I think who would could support me in this, or maybe somebody in the BC Education Ministry of Education, or even the Alberta Ministry of Education. It wouldn't be too difficult to make another curriculum for a different province, but it's really meaningful and impactful work. As I pursue my master's, I would like to do research about South Sudan, looking at my double consciousness identity, adding poetry, artwork. It'll be about intergenerational trauma, looking at South Sudanese people who left South Sudan or Sudan and are now in Canada, how that, you know, living in two worlds, juggling life and having that intergenerational trauma, because we are that first generation. South Sudanese people have only been in Canada for maybe like 30 years something. We came to Canada in that 80s, 90s, 2000s. So we have not been a big demographic in Canada, like the indigenous people who have been here since time immemorial, right? So we're still, this is not our lands. So there's that disruption when you're not on your land. And I'm reading Shukrat Make People Land and Laws. And this is a really good book